Learning is rarely as individual as we imagine it to be. Even when people work alone, they're responding to expectations, both spoken or unspoken. And what about counts? What matters and what's acceptable? Peers shape learning long before instruction does. Welcome to Learning Reframed, Education Without the Noise. I'm Dr. Ken Feldman, and today this podcast looks at how learning actually works, inside real constraints, without the hype, without the shortcuts, or unnecessary complexity. Social learning is often discussed as collaboration, group work, discussion groups, peer feedback. Those can matter and are important, but they're not the only part of the picture. Peer influence operates continuously, whether or not learning is designed to be social. It shapes how much effort feels reasonable, how visible struggle is allowed to be, and how safe one feels to asking questions. In many learning environments, peers teach one another what the real expectations are, sometimes more clearly than the instructors do. If effort is mocked, effort decreases. If curiosity is treated as naive, questions just disappear. If shortcuts are rewarded, understanding becomes just truly optional. These signals are really explicit. They're communicated through reactions, through tone, and frankly, through silence. This is why social learning can either amplify growth or quietly suppress it. One common mistake is assuming that putting people together automatically improves learning. Study groups, discussion groups helps the process. But in reality, group settings can magnify existing dynamics. If confidence is uneven within the group, dominant voices tend to lead while others just withdraw. If expectations are unclear, groups often default to efficiency over understanding, meeting deadlines, meeting timelines. The presence of peers doesn't guarantee engagement. In fact, it can just as easily increase self-consciousness. At the same time, peers can reduce isolation. When learners see others struggle productively, asking questions, revising work, admitting uncertainty, it normalizes the learning process. Difficulty becomes shared rather than personal. That's true group work. That shift matters. Peer influence also affects persistence. Learners are more likely to continue when they see others returning after setbacks. Persistence becomes a group norm rather than a personal burden. But the opposite is frankly true. When disengagement spreads quietly, it accelerates. When overlooked, factors is comparison. Comparison is a factor that plays greatly in peer education. Social environments invite comparison, even when it's discouraged. Learners notice pace, output, and recognition. These comparisons can motivate some, but frankly, they can discourage many. When comparison becomes the primary reference point, learning turns into performance. People focus on how they appear rather than what they understand. Effective social learning environments manage this risk by emphasizing shared standards over relative standings. Peers become sources of clarification, not competition. So what actually helps? First, make expectations explicit. Ambiguity allows informal norms to take over. Second, create structured opportunities for peer interaction rather than leaving it solely to chance. Unguided social learning tends to reproduce existing hierarchies. Third, normalize partial understanding. When people are allowed to be unfinished in public, learning becomes more visible and more durable. Finally, pay close attention to what peers are teaching unintentionally. The most powerful lessons are often the ones that are not planned. Peer influence in learning, whether we acknowledge it or not. The question truly is whether that influence supports understanding or quietly reshapes learning into something else. That distinction truly matters, but it's easy to miss and important to notice. So you've been listening to Learning Reframed. If today's episode resonated with you, please follow the podcast on your favorite platform and give us a like on YouTube. But more importantly, share this episode with someone who you feel might find helpful. I'm Ken Feldman, and thanks for listening to Learning Reframed. We'll see you next time.